Today I'm playing around with canvas again, instead of drawing lines and using different images and trying to animate kind of like a slideshow, going from one image to the next and creating these sort of effects, which I think are quite effective. What my application is relatively basic at this point in time. There's a main widget that has an animation controller, which is just animating over a period of 700 milliseconds, going between the values of 0 and 1. And then I'm loading two assets. I've got image 1 and image 2, and because of the way that the canvas works, I not only have to load the images, but I also have to convert them into this particular format. I think it's like a data buffer of some sort. Then it's using a widget which consumes the animation and the two images, and that's extending the animated widget, which basically means anytime there's a change on this animation controller, this animated widget detects the change and then it rebuilds, and that is using a custom paint, and that custom painter is told is provided two images and given the mix, and that's where the magic happens. It's basically, I've got to the point where there's a painter where it's given two images and a mixed value between the two. So a mixed value of 0, it's got image 1, and a mixed value of 1, it's got image 2, and then it transitions between the two. So this is my paint function. I've got two types of paint, because one is for drawing the shapes and the other is for drawing the images, which then get clipped by the shapes that are drawn underneath. I've got some calculations to figure out where I'm allowed to draw and how I'm going to split up the grid, which is what these values here decide, and then these are some recurring values that I use a lot in my calculations, so I've just declared them once at the top. It makes the rest of my code a lot easier to read and eliminates a lot of mistakes. I then draw my first image. From there I then start a mask over the top, and I start to draw my second image over the top. I'll explain the save layer in a minute, but this iterates over like a grid, so it's going from left to right and then top to bottom, and with each loop through it's drawing a small grid, which is basically our mask, and then it draws finally the image 2 over the top. Now if you look at this line and this line, there's no actual difference between the two. Well, because of the fact that I've drawn my mask underneath, image 2 gets clipped. I end up with this effect. So going from basics, I'm just going to put a return mark in here. So all I'm going to do is draw image 1 and nothing else. The rest of my code is ignored. And I'll just show you what some of these values do. So to draw an image, using the ImageRect function, then I have to provide 4 arguments. There's the image, the rectangle, which is the source, like what part of the image am I wanting to draw from, and then the target, where am I drawing to. I've put in 500 because I know that's the size. I'm not too sure if I've got the okay, the width and height are actually there, so what I'll do is, instead of repeating myself over and over again, I'll create an image width. I know the image is the same size, it's a bit cheating, but this is just for demo. So just clean up the code a little bit. So what I'm doing here is just drawing the full image. So this rectangle represents the full image size. So going from the top left corner to the bottom right. In fact, that does not look quite right. I'm going to change that to width height, and that to width height. That's better. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, if I can use just half the image, then it will stretch the image. So basically said, only take the left hand side of the image but draw it over the full size of the canvas. Or I could start from the right hand side So we'll start from the middle point and draw the right hand side of the image and stretch it over. And I can do that. I can use any combination of values there to pick which part of the image that I'm drawing. But I can also then decide where that gets drawn to. So if I only want this image to get drawn to the left hand side, then I could say use the half width. I'll get you smaller. This is a bit of a cheat again, just like I am using a square image, so I'm using the size width and for the height, whereas I should be calculating that, but it's quicker just to, for demonstration purposes, just take a quick shortcut knowing the fact that the images are square. So now the fact I can choose where I draw my image to, I can effectively decide, well, I just want to draw a small section of this image. I don't want to draw the whole thing. So let's just say I'm going to take the first 10% of the image and draw it to the first 10% of the canvas. I get a square. Change that to 0.5, 0.5. I'm able to split this image up into grids and draw it over and over again. So I've effectively split this up into a grid of 4, and I'm just drawing 2 of them. So this is the start of me now generating my large grid and stuff like that, and drawing the second image over the top in pieces. I'll just pull this back to how it was. Now I've just got image 1, and actually for now I'm just going to hide that, and I'm going to remove this line temporarily, and I'm going to not draw this image. So the next thing was to draw my mask, and what I'm doing is I'm going through the grid, through my columns and rows, and drawing from the centre of the grid outwards, and I'm using the mix to determine the size of each small grid. So this is pretty straightforward. You determine your rect using your top left and then your width and your height, and then painting it with whatever the colour, the paint that I decided for my, what I said, paint circle. I'll change that. That should be actually paint mask. We don't. Okay, so I can have squares. I can also have circles. And combine that back with my image again. This gives me this sort of effect, which is quite cool. And then I can put my background image back in again. And I get this nice transition, which is cool. Right, so something to be aware of, and that is this mystical save layer, which took me a while to find and really fully understand. If I remove this canvas save layer and hit play, then everything's broken, regardless of whether I draw the mask underneath or not. Okay, so don't draw the mask and image 2 appears. So what is the reason for that? Well, when we receive our canvas, it's actually already got something drawn in it. Everything that's been drawn already, so like in that stack, so I've got my container, I've got my background, this is the scaffold, there is a canvas there already, and you can see it because it's white. So if I was to, this is quite cool, so if I create a new paint called Paint Clear, and the blend mode is equal to blend mode dot clear, and then I just simply paint that draw color. Oh, sorry, okay, so let's scrap that. I don't need the paint, I can just draw the colour. So I'll say colour's red, but the colour's not important. What I'm going to do is say blend mode clear. Okay, so what that did was it wiped everything out. I'm not drawing a mask, I'm trying to draw this canvas underneath, but it's got nothing there anymore. Effectively, I've obliterated the canvas, so like there's nothing there anymore, nothing from the previous widgets, it's all gone. And if I then add my mask back in again, I get my reveal of my image. So, and so this just highlights the fact that if I don't clear the canvas and just draw the image, then the image will appear because there's something there already. So this is why this save layer is important. As I start to build this mask using a combination of the shape and the images, I want to make sure that I'm starting with a clean slate. So this canvas save layer is allowing me to create a new layer for me to draw my items into. And I have to say, so like this new layer that I'm going to draw into, how big do I want it? How much space do I need to accommodate? Because if I'm only drawing a small region on the screen, then it's a waste for it to create a full screen layer. So to show that, so this is my effect working again. If I only create a new layer that's only half the width, then that's the only drawing area that I get. And so when it's recomposited back together again, I'm missing half the picture. And the same if I do half the height, it clips it. So this allows me to composite, so like multiple things on top of each other. So I'm able to draw my image one first, and then mask and redraw my image 2 over the top, as long as the fact I create a canvas that is of sufficient size. There we go. So from here I can create a variety of different effects. I can use the circle animation to reveal, which is nice. And the thing to notice there is actually if I slow it right down, right, the thing to notice in this instance is I've got an overlap, and that's why I get this kind of flower effect. And the reason for that is these circles overlap and I have a partial opacity. So when they get the edges of two circles overlapping, the opacity doubles up, and so I get a nice subtle side effect, which wasn't intended, but and we'll keep in. So after drawing circles, I started playing around with rectangles, and these gave me a little bit more, a few more options in terms of what I can do. So I'll speed it back up again. Do it 2 seconds, so we still can see what's going on. So it just grows from the middle and expands out. but that we don't have to just expand out in all directions. We could limit the expansion to just one direction. So we will go take this out, take this out. This gives us kind of a shuttered blinds effect. And I could do it in the other axis, so I'll do it in the y-axis instead of the x. I could also not expand it from the middle, but go from the top left-hand corner each time. So I encourage you to experiment. I've put the code up onto GitHub, so that download the code, play around with the different effects, play around with the values. You can change the step size. If I increase that to 20, then I'll get smaller grids. I can increase it right up. There we go. Just put this back to how it was quickly. There was one last point, and that was that if you look at this right at the end, you can see all these red lines. I'm not entirely sure for the reason for that, but we're not getting a complete value. So even though I've got a mixed value of 1, there must be some rounding down somewhere, which means the fact that the grids don't quite overlap. So as a quick fix, what I'll do is I'm just going to say if the mix is smaller than 1, then do this fancy effect. Otherwise, just draw the second image straight away. There we go, that's better.